Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today in the studio, we have Dean Beattie. Dean has been involved in the health and wellbeing industry for over 20 years. After major issues with alcohol and addiction at the age of 28, he has been dedicated to helping those with depression, anxiety, and substance abuse and providing a message of change. Over the last 20 years, Dean has worked across the fitness industry in a number of different roles and has witnessed firsthand the positive impact that health and mindfulness can have to not only employees but individuals and those struggling with mental health and substance issues. Today, Dean runs his Men's Reboot program, which is an intersection of yoga and fitness and mindset and mindfulness, all of the practices which help us to live our best lives. Now, I've known Dean for around 5 years now, but I've never actually heard his full story, just tiny little snippets here and there. And from those little snippets, I absolutely knew that this was a story that you guys would want to hear. So without any further delay, I'd love to welcome Dean onto the show. Dean, welcome to Behind the Smile. How are you today?
Thanks, Ashley. It's great to be here and looking forward to it.
Thanks for bearing with me. We had to start of this a couple of times as I fumbled over my words. So thanks for being patient with me. Dean, I would love to kick off by just allowing our audience to get to know you a little bit better. So can we start with, where do you live? What does an average day look like? And what do you do for fun?
So I live in Bayside. I've just gone from the sunny climes of Brighton back to St Kilda, where I own a property. I've just done a renovation and living there, which is great.
Colourful St Kilda, we love.
Colourful. It's much more colourful than Brighton, trust me. But I do enjoy it. So an average day for me is, let me just cover off, I'm not one of those ones that believes in the 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. start. I'm not going to be part of that movement.
As a PT, that's actually quite controversial, probably.
I'm very lucky. I've done all those years of boot camps and early starts. But so I'm get up around 7. I'm a 2 coffee, read the Age, read the Herald Sun in football season type of practitioner. Meditation, mindfulness, set myself up for the day. Then from Tuesday to Friday, it's one-on-one work. And I am very blessed that I do. The clients that I work with tend to be throughout the day because the morning stuff. I'm very blessed in the industry that I'm in that I don't have to do the split shifts, which is, from a health perspective,
mornings and then afternoons, evenings.
Terrible.
Yeah, brutal.
One of my best friends is still doing 50, 60 clients a week, and he's nearly 60, and he's a great man, but it must take its toll, and I did that for years.
Yeah, I actually remember when I was teaching mornings and evenings, and I found that I actually couldn't relax into the day.
100%.
It would hangs over you like a cloud.
Yeah, it's a real. I was the same. I used to have to do clients in the morning in the gym when I started, and then I'd be going back for 3 or 4 at night. And no matter what you do, you're going back. And it's a real health risk now when you do corporate health stuff like I do. When you look at shift work, they've classified it now as a WHO health risk. So sleep and how it impacts on that. And I've never been I've always had anxiety, and we'll probably get to that. But so anytime I did boot camps, even though I had a great return rate and I enjoyed it and the clients enjoyed it, I would always be waking up anxious around it and 6 o'clock start. So much prefer that slow start to the day. And that's where I feel like I'm at my optimum. Then I'll do 4 or 5 clients. I'll usually always train through that period, either yoga or strength training in the gym or cardio. That makes me feel good. That's part of my, my modalities of treating myself as well. And then go about it. Things I do for fun is that exercise and yoga. Socialising, big golf fan. So love playing golf, go off, and that's sort of where I can find my zone or just, something that I really enjoy doing. So things like that, socialising. I'm heavily involved in the 12-step movement still, so I attend a lot of meetings and catch up with guys that I work with, and so that's a big part of my day as well, like that connection. I never had that before, and we'll probably get to that as well, yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I'd love to go there right now.
Yeah.
Dean, I asked you to bring in a photo today.
Yeah, great.
Now, this photo was from a time in your life where you were hiding behind a smile. So you were presenting one version of yourself to the outside world, but the reality was you were really struggling on the inside.
Yeah.
I would love for you to please now describe for those who are listening along what I can see in the photo that I'm about to bring up on the screen.
Yeah.
Tell me, describe the day, what's happening, and what was actually really going on for you at that time in your life.
Yeah. So I've given you 2 photos. I think the first one is the sister's, it's my sister's wedding. So it's 1998. So I got sober in 2001, just as a bit of a backstory. So my sister was getting married, obviously the biggest day in a woman's life. I'm there with my girlfriend at the time. We'd travelled from Melbourne to Mount Gambier. It's about a 5-hour trip. I was heavily in addiction at that point. So alcohol, but an everyday dope smoker. So, marijuana smoker. So, and I was smoking throughout that trip. And I don't, it's very murky for me. Like a lot of my end stage alcoholism and addiction is very hard for me to remember, as is my early recovery for the first 3 or 5 years, because I'm just all over the place mentally. But I remember that I wanted to get stoned, and I just know that I was late. I was late for my own sister's wedding. And I don't think this photo, you can see my sister turning at me, and there's a look of semi-disgust, it feels like, in her face. But clearly, and I've got a sort of, a smug sort of smile. And I think the rationale behind the photo is that, as many addicts and many alcoholics, it was all about me. I didn't really think about anyone else's, what they were going through. This is the biggest day of my sister's life. And it's shameful in some ways, but it's also, I understand the mechanics of the illness as well, about, when you're in it, just nothing else really exists, and I've done so many meetings throughout the journey, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and 12-step meetings, and, heard things about, mothers and their children and just things that people perhaps in the normal population wouldn't understand, but I understand because I've been through it. And I was like, had a wonderful girlfriend at the time, and there was another photo that I gave you that I subsequently broke up with her because I just wanted to party. I thought that that's what life was all about, and I may have looked good on the surface. I felt like I looked good in the second photo. Forget if the arms look good.
I'll share that photo on the website so everyone can see Dean.
27, 20. But inside, I'm just dying. Like at this stage, I'm on like 10 or 12 different substances. I'm using steroids. I'm smoking dope. I'm taking ephedrine to get up, to stay awake. I'm drinking copious amounts of alcohol. When I'm out partying, I'm using ecstasy. You name it. If it was put in front of me, I would take it, And it's funny because I've always been quite health conscious, and I'm very, discerning about what I put in my body today. But back then it was open slather, anything goes. So it's a really, it's funny. It's a dark time of your life, but it's also darkest before the dawn, before you start your recovery journey. So I've been sober for 23 years, and that was the descent. So that second photo in late 99, 2000 was, it was just the most horrible year of my life. It was just like consistent rock bottoms. I got exposed to a 12-step program, but I didn't really grab hold of it until I absolutely hit rock bottom at the end of that year.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living on the Gold Coast. If you ever want to have a meltdown, it's the best place as any is in Australia. So I was living on Chevron Island. So if you're going to have a drug-fueled rock bottom, that's the place. Trust me. Close to Cavill Ave, close to Surfers Beer Garden, Melbourne. Melbourne is where I spent Millennium New Year's Eve. That's another story, and just debauchery. But look, it was a really lonely time in my life. It was, my friend had accommodation up there, and it looked like free accommodation. It just sounded like, as soon as I got there, the game was up for me well before then, but it was like I was just hanging on to something, and then the benders were becoming more. It was the end stage of my addiction at that stage, and he'd had enough of me. Family was away. I was ringing my mother up, crying, drinking, and she'd be telling me just to pour it down the sink, and I couldn't do it. I'd hang up on her and put her through all the machinations that you put a mother through, and then my father had to come and pick me up in 2000. That was the start of my journey to recovery from that point. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's crazy how young you were in hindsight to hit a rock bottom. I think there's often a perception that we don't reach that until, 30s. I mean, that's considered really lucky still, more like 40s, 50s even. And I know for me, before I got into recovery, my perception of what an alcoholic looked like was a 60-plus-year-old white guy living under a bridge.
Yeah.
It certainly wasn't a super fit 27-year-old who seemingly had the world at his feet.
And that's true. And I look back then, I had the same mentality around what an alcoholic looked like. And that was why, and I went to my first meetings, and there was people there that had cerebral hemorrhages, and there was people there that had acquired brain injuries. And I thought, as many do, I'm not quite that bad. I'm going to control this. And I went back out, and I shit you not, I went out and got a job and did the job interviews and did all the hard work to get some sort of sales job on the Gold Coast. And then I had a drink on Friday. I wasn't drinking as such. I think I just have a couple. And I literally woke up on Wednesday, and I had this shadowy recollection of what had happened at that time. And So things were really starting to spiral out of control. And from that point on, it was a debacle, like every aspect of my life. And then you realise that, if you've got this illness, they say it takes 14 years to be fully blown. And I was 14 when I had a drink, and I was finished at 28. But I kind of knew deep down, if I'm being honest, at 21, 22, that there was something seriously wrong with what I was doing, So it's there. You just got to act on it.
Yeah, and I think that, I really relate to that concept of it being the disease of denial, because we can spend so many years giving ourselves every reason and excuse as to why it could be everything else other than alcohol, which is the problem. I'm feeling this way because this person did that, or like it's the blame game. You're constantly pointing the finger at everyone else, because the last thing for me that I could possibly imagine was getting rid of this thing which had become my coping mechanism and my strategy to life.
Yeah, and I agree. It was my solution. I didn't even really view it as a solution. I thought I just wanted to have a good time, but it was in hindsight, and I had some of my mentors later explain about the drip feed anxiety of addiction. And for me, once I had a drink or a drug, I'd kind of feel normal and it would level me out, but I could never control the amount that I had, and I was always one that just had to have more, always more, always more. And that's been indicative of lots of aspects of my life, so
I'm sure
we might get there.
Yeah, I think we might have a conversation about that in a moment. But I want to take it back first. I think that it's really important for our listeners to understand how you got to that point. And I always like to take it back to childhood, because what I think is really interesting about this disease is it doesn't discriminate. And everybody that I've had sit in this chair has a different experience of childhood. Some people had great childhoods and upbringings. Other people had extremely traumatic childhoods and upbringings. Can you talk a little bit about where you grew up, what your family environment was like, and tell me about that first time you took a drink at 14.
Yeah, and it's a really something that I've done a lot of work on. So I do therapy as well. It's not just 12-step. I'm one that needs all the supports. So I grew up in country town. I was born in a place called Narracourt, which not many people would have heard. It's just over the border of South Australia. And my mother and father, the other photo that I was going to bring in is a photo of my father in Garok. My father had a really, really horrific upbringing. I had 8 siblings. I think 2 suicided. Well, there's definitely 2 suicided, and he was the oldest. And it's funny that you do this based on a photo. A friend who was from that area, from Garok, which is an even smaller country town near Natimucka, near Horsham, sent me this photo of a school of all ages. My dad's in the bottom left corner, and the rest of them are sort of kids smiling and happy, and my father just looks lost and forlorn. And he had this is in the 40s. They would have been that family that would have experienced a lot of shame, and there would have been that family that didn't have money, and the kids would have been brutal well before we identified bullying and any of the supports that we have around that stuff. So I remember one of my earliest memories is my uncle coming over impersonating a cat. And it sounds funny, but we're in our lounge room and my uncle was there, and I have a brother and a sister, and my uncle was there impersonating a cat, and I didn't realise the depth of the mental illness in my family. So my father had a breakdown when I was 3. I thought he was in a hospital only for a little while, but my sister has subsequently told me it was an extended period. So my earliest memory, and this sort of led to the separation and intimacy issues and my avoid and attachment style, so there's all the words of therapy, is that waiting for my mother. My mother was a nurse and she had 3 kids under the age of 5. We're completely broke. We're living at my grandma's place in Horsham. We didn't even have enough money for our commission home, which is, in the country, that's poor. And I've never has been over the last couple of years, I didn't realise how, to the extent of the poverty that I grew up in and how that led to scarcity within myself. But so that was waiting for my mother to come home, and then they worked their way up to middle class. They worked very hard. My mother was a nurse, and it was an era when they had the Irene Bolger in early 80s, and they started to get paid what they were entitled to and penalty rates. Before then, it was just ridiculous. My father returned to some form of mental health, but always battled with that throughout his life. And so we had, it wasn't, as you get older, you think trauma, you have to be in a closet or beaten or there's degrees of trauma. So mine was probably, my father couldn't give any sort of love. He didn't have the tools to do it. I don't resent that man for that today, but I do have great sadness for me and for him that I missed out on that. And that's like a lot of families. My mother did the best she could, but she was a very distracted and she she was very much a loner as well. We didn't mix a lot. I didn't have a lot of, for me, working in men's health and studying the male psyche, I didn't have any strong male role models at all, you know, and that really impacted. I didn't have any sort of rites of passage stuff growing up. I didn't really understand what masculinity meant. I didn't understand what a male's role was, and that really impacted me later. So could have been worse, but then I had, and then I said, so I had all this stuff happening. I had all this sort of self-esteem and the way that I looked and going to high school and everything that happens. Then I had a drink, and all that just disappears overnight. I just go, wow, this is like, I can talk, I feel confident, I can relate to everyone, and then, you know, but I just couldn't stop. Once I had it, I just couldn't stop. I just wanted more. And my other friends would drink, and I was obsessed with it right from that first drink at 14. I had friends that could drink and be allowed to drink, and I just, why wouldn't you do it all the time? If it's that good, why wouldn't you do it all the time? And I tried, and it was a debacle, Ash, surprisingly enough, you know. So,
Do you remember that first night?
I do, yeah. It was my grandfather's 60th, and there's sort of this girl, you know, when you're 14, there's some girl that you're sort of interested in, and then I sort of talking to her because I didn't have all that weirdness or shyness, and then I think I was probably singing stuff that you would never do. Like, I grew up in a very male, you know, men do this and women do that, and etc. And Horsham in the 80s, and I threw up, which is, you know, part of it as well. And then I was put to bed and blacked out. And that's, you can might as well just press rinse and repeat for the next 14 years. I had a few drugs here and different things and nightclubs and stuff. But that was pretty much my experience of drugs and alcohol, was just take as much as you can. And if you start too early, you're going to black out, you know. And that's, so not every alcoholic or addict is like that, but I'm certainly one that left no stone unturned looking for a good time, you know, and you know, 90% of the time, particularly at the end, overshot the mark.
What about school at that time? Were you somebody who enjoyed school? Did you resist school? Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I discovered you know, everyone will have a different thing. You know, some are jocks or athletes. I was in that middle bracket with that stuff. I was okay, but I certainly wasn't up with the men or males you'd aspire to. But I was the class clown. I was always quite sharp. I was always good with the line. I was always quick on my feet. And when I found that it gave me a bit of attention, I loved it. And that was the role I had. So when I feel like year 8, year 9 is when you really start to get a bit mixed up. Year 7, you're still innocent and quite cute. Year 8, 9, that's gone. And 14, 15, I just didn't know what my place was. And so the smart ass came out. And so I got kicked out of school in year 10. Nothing malicious, just purely that, like, you know, not doing stuff. And I was always talented academically. My mother, God bless her, I read from a very early age. She was always very big on the modality of reading, and I could write quite well. I basically did year 12 just from being able to do essays. I got rid of you know, back in those days you did 5 subjects, so you get 4 and then 10% of the last. So I just got rid of the other one and just did 4 and just, you know, find my way to a B. That's always been my just do the least you can to get to that sort of mark. And I did that, and but it was my childhood particularly. And I've done this in therapy, I don't find it particularly joyful. I look back and it's not a I don't know, is it a reflection on it just is what it is. It was like, you know, my sister left home at an early age. My brother had his own, he was quite bullied. You know, it wasn't idyllic in any sense. You know, this wasn't a sitcom sort of upbringing, but that's the reality for many of us, you know. And I was lost. I was lost from 14 to 28, like really lost. And I've done a lot of therapy around that. And I've been lost in recovery too. I feel like the last 10 years is where I've started to understand my place and the world and around me. So very much a late bloomer in that sense, you know.
What about girls? When did they start to come into the scene?
Yeah, well, I was a very much, so I grew, I had at high school, I thought I had that chronically low self-esteem. So I had no, you know, and that's part, I look back and that's from my parents as well. My mother, God bless her soul, was a very cynical, I remember hearing my parents in the early days say, oh, I wish our kids were good looking. And it's like that stuff that you say that your kids hear and you take it on board. So you're 14, 15, you're already concerned about how you look. And so I ran with that and thought, so there was some interest, but I didn't realise. So then I got into, for me, maybe it was a good thing, I was smoking, and then I got into bodybuilding at 18 and I discovered that, and I thought, this is the thing that's going to change. You know, I'm going to get attention. It's going to be able to bring me members of the opposite sex. And so I did that, you know, manically for the next, it was never going to be as an obsessive. It was never going to be 3 times a week, moderate. It was over the top. Steroids came in the early 20s. Then I was able to combine that with the gift of the gab, and that's when I started to be able to realise that I could have something to offer in that realm. And look, the reality for me, and this is part of my story, and I've got no issue sharing, is that the sex thing can often be the next thing on the list for addicts. It can be drink, drugs, and sex. And so when I found that I could do it, and that when I say do it, attract members of the other sex and satisfy what I wanted, I was and I hate to say it, but this is the reality, very rarely thinking about anyone else. It was about my gratification. I just ran with it.
And the validation, right?
Validation, huge part of that is the validation.
Can you help? So as a female, and I can't speak on behalf of all females, but for me personally, intimacy has always, I absolutely also went through a phase when I was actually kind of in my, let's call it like 16, 17, 18, where I actually kind of went through a bit of a validation phase with that stuff as well. But I think the core underlying driver for me has always been intimacy and connection. So what's it like for a man with that mindset where the main driver is, because I know a number of guys who would agree with that. They may not openly talk about it, but I've seen that play out, and whether or not they're conscious to it, it doesn't seem like they're malicious. It's almost the same as when you arrived late. It wasn't to your sister's wedding. It's not malicious intent. It's like you're not even thinking about the consequences or anyone else.
And I smile because if anyone's well-versed to speak about this, not just for me, but for the men that I deal with and men that are friends and men that I've grown up with recovery and one of my best friends and some of that. And we laugh about it now because it's the validation. So I have, in the words of my therapist, a massive intimacy disorder. That's something you always want to hear, Ash, when you turn up.
God, she wasn't being gentle with you there, was she?
Turn up to your first session. She could have put it a little bit milder.
I was going to say, I won't say it. Keep going.
So it's the constant need for validation. So that I feel like it was the self-esteem from growing up. It's the way that you're brought up, overhearing this, like I mentioned, this and that. And so, and I joke about it with friends. I could be with, sometimes I want to be with a woman and just like, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And she says yes. And then 3 minutes later, like a goldfish, do you love me? Do you really love me? Am I attractive? So there is, if you're that avoidant attachment style, which I am.
What does that mean for those who may not have heard of it before?
Well, I mean, it just means that I struggle. I can be the greatest partner, boyfriend for 6 to 12 months. I can woo, the chase, the validation, lavish me with attention and adoration. But then as it gets into that stage, I remember a therapist saying, like, once you get to 18 months, where the gears start to grind and you can either do the work or you can get out.
Yeah.
I've got out. Like I've never really done the work to get to that nicer, better place, because everything wears off, the sexual intensity, the glow, etc. But then you need to put the work in, and I've got closer to that throughout the journey. But as I've shared with friends before, often we're starting from backwards on the grid, and it's taken a lot of work. But so that's for me, is that I somehow that love addict that just want to besotted with one. I remember thinking as I was growing up, this is how warped my thinking was. Why would sports stars or male rock stars settle down? Why would they do that? And I was just baffled, and I was like, and now as I've got older and understood it, how nice it is to have a relationship and intimacy and have someone who deeply cares for you and understands. So like I've said, I've been the greatest partner for 6 to 18 months, and I've never really been with a woman past that point. You know what I mean? And there's been. Look, my sexual history has been diverse, and there's been, diversions here and there, and it's like, it was very much like my drug and alcohol taking. It was more. I've left no stone unturned in that realm as well, and I've left no stone unturned in my drink and my drug taking. But in the end, I can be a case study to say it all doesn't work. It doesn't work. Like that constant search for validation or sexual intensity or intrigue or whichever way you want to put it, unfortunately, it leaves you as flat as it does with the drink and the drugs. The emotional hangover is a very real thing. Yeah.
So on that note, I want to go back to, did you say you were 27 or 28 when you
got sober?
Yeah, 28.
28.
Yeah. I want to go back to that moment.
Yeah.
And I want for you to please describe what was the moment that you were just like, nah, I've had enough? And how did you get through that first 12 months? I mean, I know you often talk about the fog not lifting for the first 3 to 5, which terrifies me because,
Yeah.
I'm going to be 5 in a
Yeah.
couple of months and I'm like, what do you mean the fog hasn't lifted? But yeah, just take me through that, because I think that getting sober, particularly as young as 28,
Yeah.
gosh, that would have been hard.
It was hard. I think this is what the concept of rock bottom was. So look, things were rough. Like I was like binge drinking. I was alcoholic dawn. For those who don't know what that is like I would wake up and not know. I'd wake up in a blackout, and I wouldn't know. It'd be dark, or that sort of. I wouldn't know whether it was dusk or dawn, which is a really scary space to be in. I had hypersensitivity of hearing. Like this is when your nervous system's under all sorts of duress. Drinking around the clock. I remember taking vague memories on the Gold Coast, meeting some heroin addict lady and her kind of looking after me, taking a hostage, and then like she was amazed at how physically unwell I went to Fairhaven, and I was really physical, which is a rehab, and they were amazed how sick I was. So I was under no illusions. What stopped me was that I knew, because I had another couple of relapses. I moved back to Horsham, and then we speak about, there's a famous passage in the Alcoholics Big Book where, it's called Jim's story, and he adds some whiskey to milk to think that'll be all right. And so I had variations of that. I'm just going to have a couple of light beers. I'm just going to come down to Melbourne and go to a dance party and just use ecstasy and not drink. I'm going to smoke dope and not drink. None of it works. Like I drank and drank after that, and binges. And my last binge was this pathetic. I'd smoked dope with a mate in Ballarat, and then I had to drink because I was going so paranoid. And then I started just this shitty little pub crawl back from Ararat stall. My parents were beside themselves. And there's a deep knowing within you, or for me, that if I continue this, that I'm either going to die or something really, really bad was going to happen. Part of me, I don't know, right then I wanted to complete, I didn't want to stop, but I knew I had to stop. And it was just hold on. And the next year I did some stupid shit. Like I scored a new job because I could always land a sales job in an interview, could always interview well. And then we went to a pub and they were bringing out drinks, and I had resisted that. And then this was pre-internet dating, and I was dating I met someone in Melbourne, and then there were bottles of wine. I was very close in that first year, but I knew I had to hang on. And it was the AA and the 12-step program and meetings that kept me going. I hadn't worked the steps yet, but I just knew that I couldn't. I'd get to a meeting, I'd get through another day, and I'd get to a year. And even that was a dangerous time. So I thought, if I've done a year, maybe I can just do another year. Maybe I can go out and celebrate, which is it's a bit of a common thing as well. But then when I started to do the steps and change and my life opened up, like I'd done nothing. Like, all I'd done was party and drink. I hadn't travelled. I'd done jobs that I was in the public service. No person's ever been less aligned with the public service. It was just... I had no idea what I liked, what I wanted. I had no idea of how to have a friendship or an intimate relationship or be there for friends or family. Everything good that's happened in my life has happened post-28 since I got sober. And after I did the steps, which was probably 3 or 4 years, and then I started to have awareness and life and travel and do things and discover hobbies and things that I enjoy. And it's been, obviously it's been life-changing.
I would love to know what about the steps, what was revealed to you about yourself in going through that process?
Yeah, I mean so much, but I think, and you would, I don't know, testify to this, is that when you work in wellbeing, which I do, and I've been a yoga teacher and I've been exposed to all these things and did Landmark in the early days and the Tony, whatever it is, and there's some great stuff out there, don't get me wrong, but for me, the 12-step process is mind-blowing in that, if I had to take ownership of everything that had happened in my life. And so I couldn't blame the ex-partner. I couldn't blame my dad. I remember being drunk in the early days and bursting in from the shed where I was relegated to drinking and blaming my dad for this. And I shared this with my therapist. I got quite thrilled when he got angry because never really noticed me. I just wanted my father to notice me. So just even the anger was nice. But when I went back through and looked and understood his life and what I'd done and where I come from, it's not like we're not discounting these people. We're looking at our part in it. And you just find peace. You find a realisation that, all these thoughts and things, that they're all coming from you, and that, that you can just see the futility of having these resentments and these fears and all this time you've spent being angry and fearful and resentful, and for what? There's no point, and I think, so there's that aspect to it. And then there's something intangible. There's something spiritual. There's something that is beyond my conception, which I believe my concept of a higher power or God, whatever you call it, is. And it works, and that's from helping someone else. Because I was, like I've shared, I was consumed with myself, how I looked, and that comes from my upbringing, etc. But I had to find a way to change that, and that the 12-step and helping someone else was the way. And you don't have to want to do it in the early days; you just do it, and then over time, you do want to do it, and it just works, and you start to become less selfish, and then your life expands naturally, and then you get better opportunities. It all becomes so. I understand now how much I get from doing all this stuff, but I've got to keep doing it. That's the thing, you know.
So you got sober at 28 and it's now been 23 years.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm older as well, actually.
That blows my mind. I'm going to guess that it hasn't all been smooth sailing and that you've had to navigate some challenging times through life. What do you think, and you can give me more than one answer here, but what do you think the hardest thing is that you've had to navigate over the last 23 years in sobriety? So not necessarily being sober, but you've stayed sober through it.
Yeah, look, I think, so I've shared about my parents. My father died in 2009 and I was 8 years sober and 7 years sober, 8 years sober either. But then he was in a geriatric senile unit, dementia. He shared some stuff with me, some stuff that had happened in his childhood. I didn't know whether it was from a manic episode. And I felt like it was some really, I won't in deference to him, I won't share what he said, but it was stuff that, really traumatic stuff. And so I was able to be there for his funeral and do it. And that, my parents had worked really hard. I was much closer to my mother. My mother was always the one that was there when I'd broken up. I'd go back and pat your head, Dean, you'll be there. And I was the youngest, and she did it. She was my rock. She was like the North Star. And unfortunately, my mother got cancer at 2014, and it's quite emotional for me to even think about it. And I remember exactly. I was on the golf course when she thought she had like some stomach stuff happening, and then it was cancer, and it was quite advanced, and she was a nurse, and she knew the writing on the wall. She was only 66, and I go into, and this is what I do in relationship to, I just went into this sort of robotic action mode. And then I remember her ringing me up. So that was in March as she got diagnosed. I remember taking the call at Ballarat Golf Course and coming home, and she lived in Ballarat. And then, I remember her ringing me in August saying, Dan, you know that I'm going to be dying in a year. And I was like, it's surreal to take that phone call from your mother. And then she passed away. And then I just went into did the eulogy, and I was looking good up there, whatever, like putting on the front. And then I think after that, I really lost my way. I'd had a relationship breakdown from a girl that I really loved, and I blew that up just through my avoidance and not being able to be emotionally present. And then I just jumped on Tinder and found someone else, and I was going out with an inappropriate, and then that blew up in 2015. And then I kind of thought, fuck it, I'm just going to do whatever I want in that realm, and just, the sex stuff took off again, and just this lack of sort of thinking I was just hedonism and enjoying myself. But I became quite lost for a couple of years, and then I really started therapy. I wish I had done a lot of therapy stuff. 12 steps is great, but it's not a guarantor that all aspects of your life are going to work out, So this relationship stuff I needed to look at earlier. But I think my mum dying and those things that I engaged in and how they used to make me feel later, that was probably a really dark spot. But I've had finance. Look, if you stay sober long enough, you'll be in the fetal position at some stage crying, you know what I mean? And it's not a bad thing. And grief, finally understanding that it has to come up, and grieving my father. I had an amazing experience with that, and also with my mother, and I've done a lot of breath work, a lot of EMDR. I'm passionate about men getting exposed to these modalities because I don't think we do it enough. I won't do ayahuasca, I won't do any,
mind altering.
No, that's not for me, and I don't reject that. I'm not a doctor. But for me personally, my therapist discussed, and I said, I don't feel comfortable doing it, anything that's mind altering. But I've had enormous experiences with yin yoga, EMDR, and breath work, like great, experiences. So,
and I'm curious, I want to probe on this a little bit more. Is your decision to not go down the path of mind-altering substances because you are in a 12-step fellowship, or is it because you're worried that it would set off a phenomenon of craving? Like, why is it that you draw that line?
It's probably both. Is that I am in a 12-step fellowship. I understand There's also fear of, because it's been so long, of having an altered state. So you might relate to this, but I'm one of those that I'm really wary of. I won't use alcoholic mouthwash, liqueur, chocolate. I'm very wary about cooking it. There's this anecdotal that you cook it out when you use wine. I'm just more comfortable not ingesting any mind-altering substance. I've been to a lot of music festivals in the last 6 months and like a lot of dope being smoked. And I remember going to a Tool concert just before the pandemic, and it was enclosed at Rod Laver, and I felt like I was a little bit stoned when I walked out of there. You know, we jokingly say in recovery that's a free lapse because you didn't choose to do it, but it was like I was sort of driving my car. This is odd.
Yeah, and not enjoyable.
I don't like it. I used to. It's the irony of getting sober and clean. Is I loved that feeling, but now it fills me with fear. And for me, I'll be brutally honest with you. Working in the field similar to you is sometimes people just want the easy option as well. So if these other modalities work, it's like, and I'm not disputing other aspects for weight loss or, exercise. Sometimes you've got to put the work in as well. So you can do breath work, you can do MDR, and you can get those results. Why don't you try that before you try the substance, But sometimes we just want, and I think there are some, and I only speak for me, but there are some people that, for me, the addicts and the alcoholics, as soon as they can hear of a mind-altering substance that they might be able to use, they jump at it. They love the idea. So, yeah.
And throughout those periods of grief, thank you for sharing so openly about that, or perhaps any other time over the last 23 years, have you ever thought to yourself, firstly, God, a drink would be nice?
Yeah.
And then was there ever a thought that, did you ever go further than entertaining it?
Yeah, no, I did. And I've shared this. Often I share it in men's groups, but I'm happy to share it here because it's the reality is that, this is where I was at. So I was in a relationship. I wasn't faithful in that relationship. This is just where I was at, and this was 10 years sober, and I was on a business trip to Brisbane. I was, working in the wellbeing industry, and some activities that I'm really shameful about today that I was engaging in, and then I was an inch away from drinking the minibar. That's as close as I've been, which is really scary when you're 10 years sober. And I rang my sponsor, and that's when I really had to look at this other aspects. I blew that relationship up. That was really traumatic. It was really traumatic for my partner at the time, and that's when I started to see how damaging and destructive this stuff was, and then though I haven't repeated that aspect of it, the emotional distance and inability to be totally present has cost me relationships from that point on. So, and I understand that, and in some ways it's been easy. I'm institutionalized at being single in some ways, which is sad, but I had just come out of a relationship, and it was probably the healthiest one that I've ever had. It's a pretty low bar, Ash, as we've established, but there is a real progress and hope around that. But yeah, I was really close then. I've been close I've had that. That was the only time when the thought crystallized and went a little bit further. Like, you can have the thought, but it's not the action. I've had thoughts, and I've always had alcohol in the house from partners, etc. And sometimes when I've had really bad nights, I thought, oh, it's there, but I've never gone further. It fills me with real fear when you've been around about drinking again. I don't know if I'd come back from it, if I'm really honest. Not being dramatic, it's just the reality of being sober for this period and then doing it. I'm not sure. I don't want to examine where I would end up.
It's not worth testing it out.
No.
It's really interesting to me that it wasn't grief that made you want to drink, but dishonesty and living out of alignment to your values and your core.
Yeah.
Like, that discomfort far outweighed the intensity of the grief that you would have experienced losing both your parents.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I didn't even really know what my values were. And I was like, for me, if it's a higher power driven program, which I believe it is, that whatever your concept of that is, if it's the universe, if it's God, I feel like there's things that my higher power, he, she, indifferent, whatever, wants me to do. And when I go against that, that's when there is some punishment, the anxiety, however it manifests. And that was certainly my experience in Brisbane at that time, for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? The way that I moved through life before getting sober, there were a lot of shitty behaviors.
Yeah.
And they weren't necessarily big things, but a lot of the time it was just lots of little white lies and dishonesty and things that I wasn't proud of, even just my behavior from the previous night when I'd been drinking. that just sets off that cycle of like, oh, I'm just going to drink again because I don't want to feel like this.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a beautiful part of the steps, isn't it? Like cleaning up your side of the street. I'm curious, did you ever make amends to your sister?
I did, and we had I did at that time when I got sober, and then we had a massive falling out when my mother was dying, and it's a traumatic time, it's a trying time, and but we've since repaired that. But look, I love my sister and my brother, but I see we all have our own stuff happening from our upbringing, and it comes out in different ways, and we're all just doing the best that we can. But I did, I made the amends, and like it's always been uncomfortable. I felt very uncomfortable making the amends to my. I always joke with new sponsors, making them to your mums, the easiest one. They just go, you've done such a great job, just stay sober. And
I actually didn't do my mum for about a year, but
Really?
I mean, I was living in Sydney, and then there was the lockdown, and my mum's my best friend in the whole wide world, but yeah, I was terrified just to her. But I agree, generally family are the low hanging fruit, or
they are
parents.
Yeah, and look, I'll share with you. I made it to some ex partners. There was a girl that I think, she was keen to have a relationship and I wasn't, and kept her in what we call in the web, I suppose, in another 12-step fellowship. And I look back and that's a shameful. And I, and I'll share this, like, for the female audience. And I had a new girlfriend at the time, and I walked past this girl, and out of complete fear, I was frozen. I didn't acknowledge her or say something. That's how my mind, it's such a childish view of how it, and then it happened again, and I was struck down again. I couldn't communicate, and then I made amends to her, and she just let me have it for about 20 minutes about how arrogant and self-centered and selfish she were, and just teed off, and I had to sit there, and that's why sometimes hearing that in amends is the most powerful thing, because you can hear how it influences on someone else, and for no other reason sometimes as well. You just don't want to put someone through that, or have to go back and make amends for that as well. It was just like, it was really educational for me. And look, this is at 6, 7, 8 years sober. Like, this was like stuff. I've been a really slow adopter of all areas of this. So I've put the drink and the drugs down, but other aspects, it's been a slow burn for me to really look at all this stuff. You know what I mean? So, and that continues today. Like the journey never ends. I've come from therapy today and had a very, it's good, but it's always stuff that you need to work on. So yeah.
How amazing that you're willing to look at it though. Like, not only do you have 23 years of sobriety, but you're actively seeking out ways to continue to grow and evolve. Like, that to me is.
Yeah. And I think as a male, and look, I'm quite passionate around, like, that's what the work that I do with men, but I'm also passionate about where men are at. And I look at, like a friend shared me a couple of years ago, a female friend, and I hadn't really encountered or thought about this, about the domestic violence and feeling unsafe walking back from a train. Because I've always been a biggish guy and able to, not really fearing that. And like that safety aspect of it as well. And also, I remember after that conversation hearing about, a young woman that had been on the train line to Bundoora, and she'd been brutally murdered. And they didn't need to say that it was a male. You know what I mean?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And that's happened many times. And I'm just, the anger when a relationship, just fascinated is the wrong word because it's so tragic, but I'm just, how does a man get so angry that when his partner rejects him or decides to move on, that not only does he take it out on her, but the rest of the family and the children that he loves and stuff like that. I find that so disturbing and upsetting, and I'm not empathising with the man, but I just think, what can we do to make sure that men aren't that angry and fearful or don't have any support? That's the thing. Women are so much better, and this is not, this is not a stereotype. This is proven. They're much better at communicating and getting help and mixing and stuff.
Rallying around one another.
100%. And men are terrible. So when men,
well, isn't there a crazy statistic? I don't want to butcher it, but it's like the average adult male has like only one or two, like proper friends.
I shared this on I did a thing for a corporate company, and last year for a men's health month in October, and look, they have one or two friends, and it was an antidote from my ex-partner, and this guy was really depressed, and he's going through some real things. She said, and he's got one or two good friends, and can't you tell him about? Oh no, I can't tell him about that. Can't tell him about what's going on. And I thought, you think that we're over this because I work in these fields. I'm living near the city, but men are still quite lost in this area. So what happens to men is when they're sort of in my age, 40s, 50s, if they lose the job which they define themselves by, if they lose the partner, which is their social outlet and their only thing they're clinging to, they're left with nothing. They don't have a resource. Where I'm blessed, I have probably 20 to 30 men I could ring and contact who could help and console, and also say, don't blame anyone else. So what are you going to do about it? That's the healthy aspect of being in a 12-step program. But I feel really passionate about, where men are and where in modern life I feel like we're getting, and the rise of, your Andrew Tates and the idolisation of Elon Musk. And I'm not saying that's good. It's not a political thing, but it's interesting where we're going at the moment, So,
yeah, I mean, I had someone on the show just a couple of weeks ago who brought up Andrew Tate, and his viewpoint around that was that, men are just looking for someone.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of key role models out there at the moment. And and I think to your point, you and I are, because of 12-Step Fellowship and the work that we do, surrounded by these conversations. But to realise that for the majority of people, they are incredibly lonely.
Yeah.
That's the reality of the world we're living in. And as a result, these are the behaviours that are manifesting.
Yep. Can I tell you what I'm really passionate about with that stuff as well?
Yes, please.
It just seems like every right-wing, angry male group, or it seems to hijack the fitness industry. So if you're into bodybuilding or kickboxing or boxing, you have to sort of hate the world and be sort of hate, and have these views of women and whole insult movement. I don't see why there can't be those involved in the fitness industry giving a message of inclusion and a bit more love and a bit more connection rather than always be negative and always this fear-based. There's always something taking something away from me, and you can run through Muslim, Jew. There's always a target market for that, from whatever group you're coming from. But it just annoys me that the fitness industry seems so, and it happened through COVID as well. We seem to have really taken to this, this right-wing negative viewpoint, and so I think there's some work that could be done through that as well.
It's almost like all of the fitness industry just need to spend a little more time doing some yoga.
Yes, I think they do, and like get off the online forums and maybe back on the mat, Ash. That might be the way to go. So
hey, I want to segue there right now. How did you get into yoga?
Yeah, so I got into it, if I'm being honest, because it was, I think I got into hot yoga when I was living near Paran.
Because you wanted to meet girls?
Yeah, I meant girls.
I knew you were going to say that.
Get your top off in a class, and you thought that was going to be it doesn't work, by the way. Everyone thinks it does. But yeah, and I enjoyed it. But then I was teaching at a rehab. I started at a rehab, and I didn't actually have the teaching qualification, so I had to scramble. And I was doing it more as a stretch class. And then I did my 200 hours through power living, and I really liked the philosophy. And then I understood, I think there's this thing, you come for the physical and you stay for the mental and the spiritual after a while. And and I started to see how aligned it was with my view of it's a very non-dualistic, it's not God's here, you're here, we're all connected. And that's my viewpoint with spirituality. I resonate with that. And I did like the history, I did like the and I felt really connected when I did a class, and I'm also not one that it's, because I'm in the fitness industry, I've read a lot of the tech, like a lot of the stuff you've got to, there's a book called Sweat, which is the history of exercise, and it was written by a guy called Bill Hayes a couple of years ago, and like modern yoga really was like from people from the West coming to India, and it was like an aerobics class, so it's not. The really old school yoga was where you could hold positions of meditation for a long time, like yin and different postures through that. And I love yin yoga, and I think for men, it's one of those. So a lot of people I work with through the program, a lot of people that have been in recovery or mental health issues, it's really hard to sit and meditate. There was an interesting study that the other week that about 20% of people who meditate can enhance mental health problems as well. So if you do it with a body sensation like yoga or yin or a different class, that can be much more helpful. So I'm very yang still, and a lot of exercise and things that I do, but the yin is the nice counterpoint to that. So that I got into it. I really enjoyed teaching, but sometimes the yoga scene can leave you cold a little bit as well, and a lot of Instagram going on. There's a lot of people holding dancer pose in front of tourist places, but it's a great practice. Like when I'm connected, and I love the music. I just did a class yesterday. I have a few injuries and just really enjoyed it. Just really in the flow of the breath and the music, and just feel. And I've forgotten how good it can make me feel. So.
Why do you think, without generalizing too much, but I'm going to go there. Why do you think men have more resistance to getting on a yoga mat than women?
Look, and it's, I don't know, every teacher training, my good friend Paula, she was at a teacher training last year, and I went and picked her up in Bali a couple of times for meals, and there would have been 28 women and 2 guys. When I did it, there was 3 guys.
I had one guy in mine,
And I think it's still I think it's just stereotype. I think it's just we're so still ingrained. You've got to remember Australia's like, because of the tyranny of distance where we grew up, the penal colony history. I'm not going to give a history or sociology lesson, but we are quite we're still a little bit backward in our gender and misogyny, etc. So I feel like mate, you can't do that. Like, it's still a little bit of that old school Aussieism around that. And I think it's, the strength training's for guys, the gym's for guys, and girls can do yoga. And also maybe the industry has to look, because there's a lot of classes that are, because of that market, a lot of classes are designed for women's bodies, like a lot of hip opening and a lot of physicality. A lot of postures are really problematic for me to get into. And so I'll do classes that for men, and there are differences. We're not as open through the hips, and there's a lot more strength factors. But it's such a good, every man. Like, I went to a class, the class I did yesterday that I spoke about, there was much more men than I would have thought previously. So it's a class in St Kilda. So it would have been not quite half, but not far away. So I think that's encouraging. But
that's excellent. We've just got to get my fiance on the mat.
Yeah,
now.
we will. We will. I know your
He
fiance.
refuses.
Don't give up, Ash. Don't ever give up.
We'll get there one day.
Yeah.
So good. All right. I want to talk a little bit more about the men's Reboot program that you have before we wrap up this conversation today. How did you come up with the concept, and who are the kind of people that you work with?
So they tend to be men over 50. They tend to be men that will come in, not just physical now, it's looking at all different modalities. So it's a program, like I finished when I got sober, I finished a sociology degree at La Trobe Uni, and then when in pandemic, I did some postgrad stuff from Melbourne Uni in positive psychology. So that's positive psychology, to study how we live our best lives. And so that looks at relationships, and it looks at engagement, it looks at things that bring you into flow and positive emotion. And so I incorporate aspects of that. So it's probably like 20 years of design a program for you physically, go through the gym, we can do all that stuff, but then coach around other aspects. What are you doing in your life? So how are the strength of your relationships, which we've just spoken about? Have you got some friends? They talk about, is there a person who would take you to the airport if you had major drama or someone you could rely on? You look at are you doing things for yourself that bring you, into the flow and energy as well? So it tends to be, and the reality is a lot of men who have the freedom and the time and the ability to come in and do it during the day, but it's open to anyone really. But I feel like a lot of men do get to 50, like we've spoken about, and haven't looked at other aspects of their life. It's always been work and the kids, and they're a little bit lost. Women tend to have, spread some stuff around and have some other interests and have some other confidants, etc. So it's trying to help men with that. And then I also do it with, I get referred younger men who it's nice. I enjoy a mentor who might not want to, they've had problems with drugs and alcohol, aren't quite ready for a 12-step program. And I'm a believer in it, but it's not for everyone. So I try to provide them with some tools and things to do it. And look, I'll be honest with you, sometimes the gym and the bodybuilding is a surreptitious way to get them into stuff. It's like sell it by stealth. So that's part of what I do as well. But it's probably for your 50-plus male, and I'm passionate. I know their bodies. I know what they need, to try to put different elements in what's going to help you live longer. So it's got that disease-fighting aspect, physical, so your big 4 killers, which is your metabolic disorders like diabetes, cancer, dementia and Alzheimer's. The other one I've just gone on, CVD, cardiovascular. So what things can we implement to prevent, to stop us? You're not going to see results straight away, but it will add years onto your life. And also what's going to enhance your mental health. So anxiety, depression, substance abuse, the big 3. So these are, how do we have habits that are preventative in nature? And it's the same thing I do with corporates. So I'll go in and do that exactly same program, just tailored for groups, corporates, executive leaders and stuff. So the last couple of years has been really quite successful in that, one-on-one and in groups. And it's just accountability too. It's just like my role is often just, are you going to do this weekend? Because my biggest gift is with recovery, and I suppose with exercise, is consistency. Just turning up and doing it, doing the meetings, doing the workouts, doing the yoga, doing the things. There's other areas in my life that I've spoken about that I could, do much better, but that stuff I've been sticking to. And just that's the key, is the action.
And you've been consistent for 23
Yeah.
years, and not many people, I think, on this earth can say that they've been consistent in much for 23 years. So you're a living embodiment of the work and the practice, which is really inspiring.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, I'd like to think so. And it's like, through necessity, but sometimes it's hard. Part of the positive psych is to acknowledge sometimes the things that you've done well. And I've always been a bit self-deprecating, and that doesn't serve me well as well. So no, I am proud of the things that I've done. I'm also very grateful for the people that have, given me the inspiration and support throughout that as well. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love it. Dean, we are wrapping up the end of this conversation. I feel like it always goes so quickly, but I do have one last question for you before we end. The question is, what would be your 3 non-negotiables that allow you to live life today authentic, so stepping out from behind the smile, authentic and fulfilled?
Yep. So 3 non-negotiables. I'm going to throw exercise in just because it does make me feel better, and it's not for vanity. It is for vanity. There's always a bit of vanity, but it just makes me feel better, more connected, etc. I'm going to say support, and that'll encompass 12 steps, like not doing it on my own. I've been such an individual throughout my life, and I can still do that today, but I feel better when I'm around people, but yet I'll still isolate a little bit, and I'll never spiral upwards when I do that. So that's support. And the other is, how do I put it, like finding some peace. If it's meditation, breath work, spirituality, prayer, for me, that I'm part of something greater than myself, because it's such an individualistic world, and that if you hustle and do this, but understanding that there might be, just having the idea there might be something greater. So they're the 3 things that can bring me peace and happiness in some way.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, if people want to track you down, find you, where should they go?
Yep. So you can go www.resetwellness.com.au. So there, and all longevity training. So longevity training is for all genders. Men's Reboot, but it's a similar program. So like I said, it's everything that's it's an 8-week program. It's probably going to become a 12-week program, because that's a really great time for habits to form. And then similar on the Reset Wellness, there'll be the corporate, and you'll see all the examples of the seminars and workshops that we do as well. So,
Awesome. I'll make sure I share that information in the episode show notes. We say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one needs suffer in silence. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Ash. It's been great.
Thanks, Dean.